everything has changed for Japanese Pokemon. See, for years, sealed Japanese booster boxes were easy to find, cheap, and honestly, ignored by international collectors. But suddenly, in 2023, prices for Japanese booster boxes flew through the roof as international collectors started scrambling to get their hands on what had emerged as the most dynamic and exciting and rapidly appreciating product in all of Pokemon. Modern Scarlet and Violet era sets were selling for as much as 4 to 5 times MSRP right at release. So it was shocking to see prices for popular sets like Japanese 151 falling from as high as $210 US down to $47 per box on SneakerDunk. A loss of almost 80% since those all-time highs only 6 months ago. So what the hell happened? Is there any chance the Japanese Pokemon market can recover? And what should the Pokemon collector and investor do about it? Well, I'm gonna break it all down in this video. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the TCG Buyers Club. My name's Gray, I buy cardboard, and I make collecting and investing in Pokemon simple. Make no mistake about it, the Japanese Pokemon market has crashed, and prices for modern booster boxes are as low as they've ever been. For anyone who bought heavily during the recent market peaks, well, this sucks. But to understand the long-term implications of this crash and whether or not the market can recover, we need to understand what caused it in the first place. So we have to look at supply and demand. And starting with demand, there's no perfect way that we can measure demand. But there is one tool that gets us a pretty good estimate, and one that you've probably already used yourself: Google Trends. Google Trends shows us the relative search volume of different keywords. And in many cases, we can use that volume of searches as an estimate of actual demand and interest in the products. Looking at the worldwide search volume for the term Pokemon card, we can clearly see both the 2016 Pokemon Go boom and the 2021 pandemic boom. And what's remarkable here is just the way that the demand has persisted following the 2021 boom. I mean, look at 2016 for comparison. There was a huge spike in search volume during this time, but almost as quickly as it came, it went away and search volume settled back at the levels we saw before. That rise and subsequent fall of demand simply isn't happening with the 2021 boom. And compared to search levels in 2019, we can see that the market has settled at still 2 times the search volume for this query. So while demand for Pokemon cards has certainly dropped off from the peak, we can still see that there is more demand than ever before for these products. But these are just the results for Pokemon card. What about Japanese Pokemon card? Okay, this is interesting. The search volumes for Japanese Pokemon card are literally the highest they've ever been, meaning that the English-speaking community around the world is looking for Japanese Pokemon cards more than they ever have in history. And as a proxy for demand for these products, I think we can clearly see that there is exceptional demand and interest in Japanese Pokemon right now. And the contrast with the Pokemon market as a whole is super interesting. The fact that the Pokemon market in English is still strong but down from the pandemic peaks is completely blown away by this Japanese query, which is flying through the roof at the moment. So maybe the question is, what's happening in Japan? So by instead checking Google Trends for the Japanese characters for Pokemon card, we again see a chart that looks really similar to the English Pokemon card query, where we can see the recent spike in Japan that is in 2023 instead of 2021. We can also see that demand has settled below that, but still about 2 times where it was in 2019. Given this outcome, I think it's safe to assume that the demand for Pokemon in Japan is still very, very strong, even if it's down a little bit from its peak, whereas the international interest is as high as it's ever been. And that really means that there is still enormous demand for Japanese Pokemon products. So then how do we explain the massive crash in prices? And it can only come down to one thing: supply. During the 2023 boom for Japanese Pokemon products, supply simply wasn't enough. And because it was so hard to get your hands on sealed Japanese Pokemon product, this is why we saw prices selling for 4 to 5 times MSRP at and around the release of each of these new sets. The worldwide demand for Japanese Pokemon at this time was simply far too high. And the Pokemon Company knew that, and they said they're going to fix it. Which is why today we're seeing report after report of new print waves of modern Japanese Pokemon products dating all the way back to the late Sword and Shield era. And this new supply has absolutely shocked the market, driving prices as low as they've ever been. Now, as someone who started collecting Japanese Pokemon in early 2021, I'll admit, I did not expect the Pokemon Company to be able to ramp up their production this much. During the time that I've been collecting, the supply of Japanese Pokemon products has been pretty consistent and predictable. Reprints were only done for the most overpriced and in-demand modern sets, and when they came out, they had a relatively small and temporary effect on market prices, with the demand quickly consuming them and prices recovering and continuing to appreciate as normal. In fact, based on this experience, when the news broke about the Japanese 151 reprints, this is what I had to say. With 151, I think we are definitely going to see a decrease. I don't think it's going to be crazy. I think we're still going to be looking at the single most expensive booster box in the Scarlet and Violet era, and that's just totally fine. The reality is that the Pokemon Company in Japan does not have a track record of reprinting their sets into the ground, and I was wrong. These reprints have been absolutely enormous, and it's clear now in hindsight that the Japanese Pokemon Company has put considerable effort into ramping up their production capabilities, and they're now bringing the full force of that effort to market. But this isn't necessarily a bad thing. Yes, it sucks for anyone who's been aggressively buying in the past year or so, and if that's you, I'm sorry. But it's so important to remember that for the long-term health of the Pokemon hobby, Pokemon cards need to be accessible and affordable to as many people as possible. It shouldn't feel like you're being forced to empty your wallet just to participate in the hobby. Instead, we want the average consumer to be able to go to the store and buy Pokemon cards at reasonable prices so that they have the best chance of having a great time beginning to collect and play with them. And the Pokemon Company knows this. They will always make sure they're focused on making modern product available to the market in order to meet demand. And that's exactly what's happened here. For the investor, however, these supply shocks do have a substantial impact. Because even if you start buying now at these market lows, the timeline for price appreciation has been reset and extended. And to understand this, let's look at 2016's XY Evolution set in English. As a reprint of the popular base set to celebrate Pokemon's 20-year anniversary, and being released in November 2016 following 2016's Pokemon Go boom, well, the Pokemon Company International produced an enormous supply for this set. So much so that sealed booster boxes quickly crashed to prices far below MSRP, and still, you couldn't sell them. And the boxes stayed incredibly cheap for about 5 years following that. It wasn't until 2021's pandemic boom, where demand spiked so much and many new people coming back to the hobby wanted to open this nostalgic set, that the supply finally dried up and prices started to appreciate. For anyone who was buying Evolutions in 2019 at market low prices below $90 US, well, in 2021, they were laughing as box prices surged to over $1,000 US. But investors who bought in 2016 or 2017 had to hold it for a really long time with no notable price movements until then. And that investing time frame affects your return. And this all happened because the supply was created for a demand that disappeared. Remember, when we look at the graph, that 2016 surge was very temporary and disappeared as fast as it came. So the supply that was designed to meet the peak of that demand needed to be consumed by a much smaller demand over a much longer time frame. This is exactly what we have to look at with the Japanese Pokemon market. only time will tell just how long it might take for the Japanese products to start appreciating again. But there is one significant difference between this and 2016's evolutions. And that's that the demand is still there for Japanese products. And if the demand is consistent, the supply will be consumed. This is part of what I like to call the scarcity-value cycle. It's the result of some human psychology that makes it so that we tend to undervalue products that are widely available and cheap. But as long as demand is consistent, we will eventually see that supply start to dry up, and with higher scarcity leads to higher prices, causing a buying frenzy that can rapidly run up the price. For evolutions, it took ages for the supply to disappear so that the buying frenzy could begin. But with the Japanese product, I don't think it's going to take that long. Sure, we'll probably be enjoying these low prices for some time still, but I don't think it's going to last years. Now, of course, none of this is financial advice. I'm just a basement dweller with delusions of Pokemon investing grandeur. But as long as we see this consistent demand for Japanese Pokemon, I'm fully expecting the price to stabilize over the course of the year and for us to return to a standard pattern of gradual appreciation relatively soon. And if demand were to suddenly increase more dramatically for Japanese Pokemon, I think we could be in for one hell of a ride. So what should you do as a collector and investor? And to me, if you have any interest in Japanese Pokemon, it is just a great time to be buying. If you want to rip packs, amazing sets are as cheap as ever. And if you're a investing degenerate like me, it's the perfect time to start building your positions in Japanese products. Because our instincts in these types of market crashes is often to take a wait and see approach. But if you have conviction that Japanese products are amazing and the demand is here to stay, then you need to set aside those hesitations and look to start taking action. As Warren Buffett famously said, be fearful when others are greedy and be greedy when others are fearful. And I see a market full of fear. If you benefited at all from this conversation, it would mean the world to me if you could give me a thumbs up and subscribe for more Pokemon market analysis just like this. And as always, thank you so much for tuning in to the TCG Buyers Club. My name's Gray, I buy cardboard, and I'll see you in the next video. Ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da